The rain came down in sheets, hammering the roof of our old Virginia house like it was trying to break through. I stood by the window, watching the world blur, my breath fogging the glass as my heart pounded with a secret I'd buried for years. Then I saw him, Ethan, my stepbrother, stepping out of a beat-up pickup, taller and broader than I remembered, his silhouette cutting through the storm like a promise I wasn't ready to face. It had been 5 years since I last saw him. 5 years since I'd slammed the door on our shared childhood. On the late-night talks in our cramped attic room. On the way his laugh used to make my chest ache in ways I didn't understand. Back then, I was 16, scrawny, and terrified of the feelings stirring inside me. Ethan was 18, all reckless energy and crooked smiles. The kind of guy who could charm anyone but never seemed to notice men the way I wanted. So I pushed him away. Ignored his calls. Dodged his visits. Built a wall so high I thought I'd never see him again. But now, at 21, I was back in this suffocating house for the summer. And Ethan was here too. No longer the lanky kid I'd left behind. He shook the rain from his dark hair as he stepped onto the porch, his flannel shirt clinging to his shoulders, outlining muscles that hadn't been there before. I froze, my hand still on the window pane, as he looked up and met my eyes. Those hazel eyes hadn't changed, still sharp, still seeing right through me. "Caleb," he said, his voice low and rough, like he'd been carrying my name for years. I wanted to run, to hide, but my feet wouldn't move. Dinner that night was a disaster. Our parents, oblivious as always, chattered about renovations and neighborhood gossip while Ethan and I sat across from each other, the tension between us thick enough to choke on. He kept stealing glances at me, his jaw tight, like he was holding back a storm of his own. I focused on my plate, pushing mashed potatoes around, trying to ignore the way my skin burned every time his knee brushed mine under the table. "You're quiet tonight, Cal," my mom said, her voice cheerful but distant. I mumbled something about being tired, but Ethan's gaze pinned me in place, daring me to say more. After dinner, I escaped to the backyard, needing air, needing space. The rain had stopped, leaving the grass slick and the air heavy with the scent of wet earth. I leaned against the old oak tree, the one we used to climb as kids, and tried to steady my breathing. That's when I heard his footsteps. "You can't keep running from me," Ethan said, his voice closer than I expected. I turned, and there he was, inches away, his presence overwhelming. He'd grown into his frame, all broad shoulders and quiet strength, but his eyes still held that same softness I'd once mistaken for indifference. "I'm not running," I lied, my voice barely above a whisper. He stepped closer, and I could smell the rain on his skin, mixed with something warmer, like cedar and smoke. "You've been running for years," he said, his words cutting deeper than I wanted to admit. "You think I didn't notice? You think I didn't care?" My throat tightened, and I looked away, but he caught my chin, forcing me to meet his gaze. "Caleb, I'm not that kid anymore. And neither are you." I wanted to push him away, to tell him he was wrong, but my body betrayed me. My hands trembled, itching to reach for him, to bridge the gap I'd spent years widening. "What do you want, Ethan?" I asked, my voice cracking. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned in, his breath warm against my cheek, and said, "Just one night. Give me one night to show you what you've been running from." My heart stopped. the world tilted. One night, the words hung between us, heavy with promise and danger. I knew what he was asking, and I knew what it could cost us. Our parents were inside, oblivious, but the town we lived in wasn't. Virginia wasn't always kind to people like us, and the thought of crossing that line with my stepbrother, of all people, sent a jolt of fear through me. But there was something else, too. Something that had been buried since I was 16, clawing its way to the surface. "Ethan, we can't," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. He smiled, that same crooked smile that used to make my stomach flip. And it was like the years hadn't passed at all. "Can't. Or won't," he challenged, stepping back just enough to give me space to breathe, but not enough to let me escape. I didn't have an answer. Not yet. The next few days were torture. Ethan was everywhere, helping our dad fix the garage, laughing with our mom in the kitchen, sprawled on the couch watching old movies like he belonged here. Every glance, every brush of his arm against mine, felt like a spark threatening to ignite something I couldn't control. I tried to focus on my summer job at the local bookstore, losing myself in stacks of dusty novels. But my mind kept drifting back to him, to the way he'd looked at me under the oak tree, to the way his voice had softened when he said my name. One afternoon, I came home to find him in the attic, sorting through old boxes. The space was cramped, the air thick with dust and memories. "What are you doing up here?" I asked, trying to sound annoyed but failing. He held up a faded Polaroid of us as kids, grinning at the camera, our arms slung around each other. "Remember this?" he asked, his voice quiet. I did. I remembered every moment we'd spent up here, whispering secrets in the dark, dreaming of futures we were too young to understand. "You were my best friend, Cal," he said, setting the photo down. "And then you just disappeared." The hurt in his voice hit me like a punch. I wanted to explain, to tell him I'd been scared, confused, ashamed of the feelings I didn't know how to name. But before I could speak, he closed the distance between us, his hand resting on my arm. "I'm not letting you disappear again," he said, and the weight of his words pressed against my chest, making it hard to breathe. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was quiet, but my mind was a storm. I kept replaying his words, his touch, the way he'd looked at me like I was the only thing that mattered. I got out of bed and crept downstairs, hoping a glass of water would calm me down. But when I reached the kitchen, I found Ethan sitting at the table, staring out the window at the moonlit yard. He didn't turn when I walked in, but I knew he sensed me. "Can't sleep either?" he asked, his voice soft. I shook my head, sitting across from him. The silence between us was heavy, charged with everything we weren't saying. Finally, I broke it. "What happens if we do this?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "If we give in." He looked at me then, his eyes dark and serious. "We figure it out," he said. "Together." The word "together" hung in the air, a lifeline I wasn't sure I could grab. But as I looked at him, at the boy I'd spent years trying to forget, I felt something shift inside me. Maybe it was time to stop running. Maybe it was time to face the truth I'd buried all those years ago. But as I opened my mouth to speak, a floorboard creaked upstairs, and the reality of our situation came crashing back. We weren't just two people falling for each other. We were stepbrothers. And in this small, Judgmental town. That was a line we might not survive crossing. The days blurred into a haze of stolen glances and unspoken promises. Ethan didn't push. Didn't bring up that night in the kitchen again. But his presence was a constant reminder of what he'd offered. One night, the idea consumed me, gnawing at my resolve until I could barely think straight. Every time he laughed, every time his hand brushed mine as we passed in the hallway, I felt myself unraveling. But fear kept me tethered, fear of what it would mean, of what we'd lose if anyone found out. I threw myself into distractions, spending long hours at the bookstore, reorganizing shelves until my hands ached. But even there, Ethan found ways to creep into my thoughts. I'd catch myself staring at a novel's cover, its characters locked in an embrace, and wonder what it would feel like to let go, to let myself fall into him. Then I'd shake it off, reminding myself of the whispers I'd heard growing up in this town. The way people talked about those kinds of relationships with disgust curling their lips. We weren't blood, but we were family in the eyes of everyone else. And that was enough to condemn us. One evening, I came home to find Ethan in the backyard, shirtless and swinging an axe at a pile of firewood. The summer heat clung to his skin, and I couldn't look away, my throat dry as I watched the muscles in his back flex with each swing. He caught me staring and grinned, setting the axe down. "Want to help?" he called, his tone teasing but his eyes serious. I mumbled an excuse and fled inside, my heart racing. I was losing control, and I hated it. That night, our parents announced they were leaving for a weekend getaway, some last-minute trip to the coast. The house would be ours for 2 days. The moment they said it, Ethan's eyes flicked to mine, and I knew he was thinking the same thing I was. One night, the opportunity was there, dangling like a forbidden fruit, and I didn't know if I had the strength to resist it. They left the next morning, their car disappearing down the gravel drive as Ethan and I stood on the porch, the silence between us deafening. "You okay?" he asked, his voice gentle. I nodded, but my hands were shaking. He noticed. Of course, always noticed and stepped closer, his fingers grazing my wrist. "Caleb," he said, and the way he said my name felt like a plea. "We don't have to do anything you're not ready for. But I'm here. I've always been here." I wanted to scream, to tell him how much I wanted this, how much I'd always wanted it, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I turned and walked inside, heading for the attic. It was the only place that felt safe, the only place where the world's judgment couldn't reach us. Ethan followed, his footsteps steady behind me. When we reached the attic, I sank onto the old couch, staring at the Polaroid he'd found days ago, still sitting on a box nearby. "Talk to me," he said, sitting beside me, close enough that our shoulders touched. I took a deep breath, trying to find the words. "I'm scared," I admitted finally, my voice barely audible. "Not just of us, of what happens after, of what people will say, of what it'll do to our family." He was quiet for a moment, then reached for my hand, his fingers warm and steady. "I'm scared too," he said, "but I'd rather face that fear with you than spend another day pretending I don't feel this." His words broke something in me, a dam I'd built to keep my feelings at bay. I turned to him, and before I could stop myself, I kissed him. It was clumsy at first, desperate, but then his hands were on my face, pulling me closer, and the world fell away. There was only Ethan, his lips soft and urgent, his breath mingling with mine. It was everything I'd been running from, everything I'd been too afraid to want. We pulled back, both of us breathing hard, and for a moment, I thought I'd made a mistake. But then he smiled, that crooked smile that had haunted me for years, and I knew there was no going back. One night, he whispered, echoing his earlier words. But this time it wasn't a question. It was a promise. We spent the night in the attic, tangled in each other, whispering truths we'd kept hidden for too long. He told me about the years he'd spent searching for me, the letters he'd written but never sent, the ache of knowing I'd pushed him away. I told him about the shame that had consumed me, the fear of being seen, of being judged. In that attic, with the world locked outside, we were just two people who loved each other. And for the first time, that felt like enough. But morning came too soon. And with it, reality. We couldn't stay in the attic forever. The town was still out there, with its prying eyes and wagging tongues. And our parents would be back tomorrow. As we lay there, the first light of dawn creeping through the attic window, I felt a knot of dread in my stomach. What now? I asked, my voice small. Ethan tightened his arm around me, his lips brushing my forehead. We figure it out, he said again. But this time, his voice was less certain. That day, we tried to act normal, but everything felt different. Every touch, every glance carried the weight of what we'd done, what we'd admitted. I wanted to believe we could make it work, that we could carve out a space for ourselves in a world that wouldn't understand. But then I saw Mrs. Hargrove, our nosy neighbor, peering over the fence as Ethan and I sat on the porch, our knees too close together. Her eyes narrowed, and my heart sank. The real world was closing in, and I wasn't sure we were ready for it. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Ethan's steady breathing beside me, his arms still draped over my waist. For a moment, I let myself believe we could stay like this safe, hidden, ours. But the creak of the front door downstairs shattered that illusion. Our parents were back early. Panic seized me as I shook Ethan awake. They're here, I whispered, my voice trembling. His eyes snapped open, and for a second, we just stared at each other, the weight of our secret pressing down. We scrambled to make ourselves presentable, but my heart was racing. What if they'd seen something? What if Mrs. Hargrove had already started talking? Downstairs, our parents were all smiles, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. Ethan played it cool, joking with our dad about the trip, but I could barely string two words together. Every time I looked at him, I saw the attic, felt his hands on me, heard his whispered promises. And every time I looked away, I saw the town, the judgment, the life we'd never be allowed to live. That afternoon, Ethan pulled me aside in the garage, his expression serious. We need to talk, he said, his voice low. About us. About what we're gonna do. I wanted to tell him I was all in, that I'd face anything for him, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I thought of the whispers at church, the way my boss at the bookstore had once fired a guy for being too flamboyant. This town didn't forgive. And our parents, they loved us. But would they understand? I don't know if I can do this, I admitted, my voice breaking. Ethan's face fell, but he didn't argue. Instead, he took my hand, his thumb brushing over my knuckles. I'm not giving up on you, he said. but I won't push you into something you're not ready for." He let go, and the absence of his touch felt like a wound. The next few days were agony. Ethan gave me space, but I could feel his eyes on me, waiting for a sign I wasn't sure I could give. I threw myself into work, staying late at the bookstore, but the ache in my chest wouldn't go away. I missed the way he made me feel seen, the way he made me believe we could be more than a secret. One night, I found a note slipped under my bedroom door. It was in Ethan's handwriting. Just a few words: "Meet me at the oak tree." Midnight. My heart pounded as I read it, torn between fear and longing. I knew what meeting him would mean: a choice, a line we couldn't uncross. But I also knew I couldn't keep running. At midnight, I slipped out to the backyard, the air cool and heavy with the scent of summer. Ethan was there, leaning against the oak tree, his silhouette outlined by moonlight. "I'm leaving tomorrow," he said as I approached, his voice steady but laced with pain. "Got a job offer in Seattle. I can't stay here, Cal. Not if you're not with me." The words hit like a punch. He was giving me an out, but he was also giving me a chance. I stepped closer, my hands shaking. "I'm scared," I said again. But this time, I didn't stop there. "But I'm more scared of losing you, of spending the rest of my life wondering what could have been." His eyes softened, and he reached for me, pulling me into his arms. "Then come with me," he whispered. "We'll figure it out together." I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. And for the first time, I believed we could. Seattle was a world away from this town, a place where we could be more than stepbrothers, more than a scandal. It wouldn't be easy. Our parents would have questions, and the world would still judge, but standing there, wrapped in Ethan's arms, I felt a strength I hadn't known I had. The next morning, we told our parents we were leaving. Not the whole truth. Not yet. But enough to start. My mom cried. My dad looked confused. But they didn't stop us. As we packed Ethan's truck, I glanced at the oak tree, at the fence where I imagined those carved words from the image prompt: "A forbidden love dares to bloom." They felt true now. Not just a romantic ideal, but a promise we were ready to keep. We drove west, the Virginia skyline fading in the rearview mirror. Ethan's hand rested on mine, steady and warm. And for the first time in years, I felt free. We weren't running from our past anymore. We were running towards something new, something ours. And as the miles stretched out before us, I knew that whatever came next, we'd face it together, not as stepbrothers, but as two people who chose love over fear, who chose each other against all odds.